My name is Jennifer. I'm the older daughter. And for most of my life, I believed that meant something. That being the firstborn, the responsible one, the one who never gave my parents a reason to worry. That it would count for something. That when the time came, they would show up for me the way I always showed up for them. I was wrong. My sister Patricia is 3 years younger than me. And before I say anything else, I want to be really clear. I love my sister. This is not a story about hating her. Patricia didn't do anything wrong. She didn't ask for any of this. She's actually one of the most genuinely kind people I know, and that made the whole thing so much harder to process, because I couldn't even be properly angry at her. I could only be angry at the situation, at my parents, at the quiet, unspoken message that had been living inside our house for years without anyone ever saying it out loud. So here's what happened. When I turned 17, I started getting serious about college applications. I was a decent student, not perfect, but I worked hard. I had a 3.6 GPA. I was involved in a few clubs. I volunteered on weekends. I sat down with my dad one evening at the kitchen table, and I asked him very directly, "Dad, how much can you guys help me with college?" And he looked at me with this expression I still can't fully explain, and he said, "We'll figure it out, Jenny. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." I held on to those words like they were a promise, and I built my entire future around them. I applied to 4 schools, got into 3. The one I really wanted was a state university about 2 hours from home. Not fancy, not expensive as far as colleges go, but it had the program I wanted, and I had fallen in love with the campus the moment I visited. I came home waving that acceptance letter like it was a golden ticket. My mom hugged me. My dad smiled. Patricia, who was 14 at the time, jumped up and down on the couch. It was a good night, and then the financial conversation actually happened, and everything changed. My dad sat me down about 2 weeks later and explained very calmly, very matter-of-factly, that they couldn't help me with tuition. He said money was tight. He talked about the mortgage, about some debt they were carrying, about how the timing just wasn't right. He said I should look into loans. He said lots of kids do it. He said it would build character. I sat there and I nodded, because that's what I did. I nodded and I swallowed things down and I told myself it was fine. I took out loans. I got a part-time job before I even moved into my dorm. I worked 20 hours a week my entire freshman year while also trying to pass my classes and figure out who I was as a person. I ate ramen not as a joke, but because it was genuinely what I could afford. I missed parties. I missed events. I missed a lot of sleep, but I did it. I kept going. And somewhere in the exhaustion, I actually found a version of myself I was really proud of. Now here's where the story takes a turn, and I need you to stay with me, because what I found out, almost by accident, is the kind of thing that doesn't just hurt you once. It keeps hurting every time you think about it. It was the summer before Patricia's senior year of high school. I was back home for a few weeks between semesters, working extra hours to save up. I was sitting in the kitchen one morning, still half asleep, when I heard my parents talking in the living room. They weren't fighting, they were planning. I heard my dad say Patricia's name. I heard him mention a school, a private school actually more expensive than the one I'd attended, and then I heard him say, "Clear as anything, we'll cover whatever her financial aid doesn't." I stopped moving. I stopped breathing for a second. I told myself I heard it wrong. I went back to my room, and I sat on the edge of my bed, and I stared at the wall. And then I went back out there, and I very casually asked my mom, "Hey, are you guys helping Patricia with college?" And my mom, without even a flicker of hesitation, said, "Of course. We've been saving up for a while now. We want her to be able to focus on school. We want her to be able to focus on school." I didn't say anything. I smiled. I said that was great, and I went back to my room and I sat with that sentence for a very, very long time. Here's what was going through my head, and I'm being honest with you here because I think it matters. It wasn't just hurt, it was confusion, because I needed that same thing. I also needed to be able to focus on school. I also would have loved to not work 20 hours a week while trying to survive academically. So the question I could not shake was, why her and not me? What was the difference? What did I do, or not do, or fail to be, that meant I didn't deserve the same thing my sister was going to get? and I tried to find an answer that made sense. I really did. I thought maybe it was about money. Maybe their situation had genuinely improved in the 3 years between my enrollment and Patricia's. That was possible. That was a real thing that could have happened. But then I thought about the timeline. I thought about how deliberately my dad had said, "We've been saving." That means this was planned. This was a decision. And at some point, someone made a choice, a clear, conscious choice. And that choice was that Patricia's education was worth investing in, and mine was something I should just figure out on my own. Now I want to pause here for a second and tell you something important, because the story isn't over. Not even close. What I haven't told you yet is what I eventually found out about why. The real reason. And trust me, I did not see it coming. None of us did. I carried this quietly for months. I didn't bring it up. I watched Patricia get excited about her applications. Watched my parents sit with her at the kitchen table the same way I'd once sat hoping for reassurance. And I watched them actually come through for her. I watched money appear that had never appeared for me. I was 20 years old and I was learning in real time what my place in this family actually was. And I want to be honest, it changed me. It made me pull back. I called home less. I stopped sharing things. When my parents asked how school was going, I'd say fine and move on. Because how do you explain to someone who loves you? And I do think they loved me. In their way, that their actions taught you something about your own worth that you're going to spend years trying to unlearn? Patricia got into her school. The private one. It was a big deal. Celebrations, phone calls to relatives, the whole thing. And true to their word, my parents helped her. Not a little, fully. Tuition, housing, a monthly allowance for groceries and books. The whole package. The thing I had built my exhausted, stretched-thin college life wishing I had. I graduated the following spring. Quietly, my parents came to the ceremony. We took some photos. My dad gave me a hug and said he was proud of me. I smiled and said thank you, and I meant it, and I also felt completely hollow saying it, because the pride felt like it was missing something, like it was pride without accountability. Like he could be proud of what I'd accomplished without ever acknowledging what it cost me to accomplish it alone. And then 2 years later, Patricia graduated. Now here's the part of the story that I've thought about more than any other part. The part that actually broke something open in me in a way I still don't fully understand. Patricia's graduation was a much bigger event than mine. Extended family came. My aunt flew in from out of state. There was a dinner reservation at a nice restaurant afterward. My dad wore a tie. He never wears a tie. And I was there, as her sister, genuinely happy for her. Because again, I love Patricia, and none of this was her fault. But I was also sitting with this quiet, heavy thing inside my chest that I'd been carrying for years. And then they called Patricia's name. She walked across that stage. And I looked over at my dad. He was crying. Not just a little misty. Actually crying. Tears running down his face, hand over his mouth, the whole thing. And my mom reached over and grabbed his arm and they had this moment together. That was so full of love, and so full of pride, and so full of everything you want your parents to feel for you. And something inside me just broke. Quietly. Without any drama. Just a clean, silent break. Because I remembered my graduation, and I thought about whether my dad had cried then. And I knew that he hadn't. I'd watched his face. I had been watching his face my whole life, hoping to see exactly what I saw right now on Patricia's day. And it hadn't been there. Not like this. On the drive home, I sat in the back seat and I looked out the window the whole time. And somewhere between the highway and our exit, I made a decision. I was going to ask. I was finally going to say the thing I had been not saying for years. Not in anger. Not to blow anything up, but because I deserved an answer, because the little girl who had sat at that kitchen table and taken, "We'll figure it out," as a promise, deserved to finally understand what happened. I asked my dad a few days later. I sat down with him, just the two of us, and I laid it out very calmly and very clearly. I told him what I remembered. I told him what I had overheard. I told him about the weight of working through college while watching the plan change for my sister. And then I asked him, why? He didn't answer right away. He looked at the floor, and then he said something I never expected. He said, "We thought you were stronger." That was it. That was the reason. They thought I was stronger. They looked at their two daughters and they decided, somewhere along the way, that I could handle hard things. And Patricia needed more protection. And they had never once stopped to ask me if I wanted to be the strong one. They had never asked if I was okay carrying that. They had just decided it for me and moved on. And here's the thing about that, and I want to say this carefully because it matters. I understand it now, even though it hurt. My parents are not villains. They were not sitting in a back room somewhere deciding to shortchange me out of cruelty. They genuinely believed they were reading their children correctly. They thought they were protecting the one who needed it most. But in doing that, they failed to see that I needed things too. That strength isn't the absence of need. That being capable of surviving something hard doesn't mean you should have to. My dad sat there after he said that, and after a long silence, he started crying again. Just like he had at Patricia's graduation. And this time, I think it was different. I think this time he was finally seeing something he'd been looking away from for a long time. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't realize, and I believe him that he didn't fully realize, how much it had affected me. He said watching Patricia graduate had made him think about me, about my graduation, about the fact that my face in those photos looked proud but also tired in a way he had never really sat with before. He said he should have done better, and I sat with that apology. I let it land. And you know what? It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the loans I'm still paying off, or the years of feeling like an afterthought, or the slow way I'd learned to expect less from the people who were supposed to show up for me unconditionally. But it was something. It was real. And it opened a door that I think had been shut for a very long time. Patricia and I talked about it eventually too, once I felt ready. She had no idea the extent of it. She knew our parents had helped her, and that they hadn't helped me the same way. But she had been a teenager when it was all decided and nobody had ever sat her down and explained the full picture. When I told her, she went quiet for a long time. And then she said, "Jen, I'm so sorry. I would have said something if I knew." And I believe her too. Here's what I want to leave you with, because I think this is the part that actually matters. Not the wound, the lesson. I spent years measuring my worth by the way my family showed up for me. And when they fell short, I internalized that as something being wrong with me. As if I was the problem. As if my strength was a curse instead of a gift. And it took me a very long time, and honestly, a lot of therapy, I'm not going to pretend otherwise, to understand that the way people treat you is a reflection of their limitations, not your value. My parents did not fund my college because they thought I didn't need it. Not because I wasn't worthy of it. Not because I mattered less. They were working with blind spots and assumptions and a flawed kind of love that thought it was doing the right thing. That doesn't make it okay, but it makes it human. And understanding the difference between you weren't worth it and they couldn't see it, that shift is everything. I am proud of how I got through college. Not in spite of doing it alone, but genuinely, fully proud. Because that version of me, the one eating ramen and setting 3 alarms and refusing to quit, she built something real. She built me. And if you're sitting somewhere right now feeling like your family chose someone else, like your name keeps getting passed over, like you're always the one who has to figure it out, I just want you to know that being the one they thought was strong enough to handle it does not mean you were the one they loved less. Sometimes it just means they couldn't see your softness. And that's their loss, not yours. You are not less valuable because someone underestimated what you needed. You never were. And if this story hit close to home, share it. Because somewhere out there is another Jennifer who needs to hear this today. And she deserves to know she's not alone.